My name is Olivia Grant, and I learned a new kind of pain at the hospital. It was not the sharp pain in my side, or the dizziness. It was the way my 5-year-old daughter, Sophie Grant, looked at me with wide eyes. She sat on the edge of my bed, holding a paper cup of water. I tried to smile, and I told her I would be okay. A nurse stepped in, and her voice turned careful and urgent. She said they needed an adult guardian for Sophie, right now. I told them to call my parents, Howard Grant and Deborah Grant, because family should show up. My hands shook as I said it, because I already knew the risk. Still, I told myself they would not refuse a child. The nurse called, then stepped behind the curtain to speak. I listened to her side of the conversation, and my stomach tightened with every pause. When she came back, her face looked strained, like she was carrying my disappointment. She said my parents were coming, and she asked me to rest. A few minutes later, Deborah arrived with Howard close behind. They looked annoyed, not worried, like they were late to something better. Deborah glanced at my monitors, then at Sophie, then back at me. She asked what happened, and I tried to explain between breaths. I said the doctors needed tests, and I might be admitted overnight. Howard interrupted and asked why I could not handle my own mess. Sophie stepped closer to me, and I felt her small hand on my arm. The nurse asked my parents to sign paperwork, to take Sophie home until I was stable. Deborah stared at the form, then shook her head. She said no. We are not doing this. The nurse blinked and asked if she understood. Deborah said Sophie is too much, and we have plans. Howard muttered that Sophie is a nightmare child, right in front of her. Sophie's face went blank, like she was trying not to cry. I felt heat rush up my neck, and I tried to sit up, but pain pushed me back. I asked them what plans could possibly matter more than their granddaughter. Deborah said Rachel Grant needs us, and Miles Carter has a trip planned. She said they are leaving for the coast, and they are not changing it. The nurse said if they refused, the hospital would have to contact social services. Deborah shrugged, like it was not her problem. Then she turned and walked out, and Howard followed without looking back. Sophie stood there, small and silent, holding her water cup like it was a shield. A social worker named Kara Benson arrived soon after, speaking softly, asking questions with gentle eyes. I could barely answer, because my throat was tight with rage and shame. Sophie whispered that she did not mean to be bad. I pulled her close with trembling arms, and I told her she was not bad. I promised her I would fix this, even if my own parents would not. Kara Benson sat beside my bed, speaking softly and watching Sophie Grant closely. She explained that if no guardian came, the hospital had procedures. She said they could not leave a child alone, even briefly, and she had to document everything. I nodded, fighting tears, while my stomach twisted with shame and fury. Sophie stood near the curtain, clutching her cup, trying to be invisible. Kara asked for another emergency contact, someone who could pick Sophie up today. My first instinct was to say I had nobody, because that is how my parents trained me. Then I remembered one name, Aunt Denise, my mother's sister, the one who always sent birthday cards. Deborah Grant used to call her dramatic and said she could not be trusted. Kara asked if I wanted to try, and I said yes. She dialed, and I listened to the ringing like it was a countdown. Denise answered on the second ring, and Kara explained the situation quickly. Denise did not hesitate, not even for a second. She asked for the hospital address, asked if Sophie was safe, then asked what Olivia needs. Kara told her where to park, and Denise said she was already grabbing her keys. When the call ended, Kara looked relieved, and she told me we would keep Sophie nearby until Denise arrived. A nurse brought a coloring book and crayons, and Sophie sat at a small table. She drew silently, shoulders tight, eyes flicking toward the door. I called her over and pulled her close, careful of my pain, and I told her she did nothing wrong. Sophie whispered that Grandpa said she was a nightmare, and her voice cracked. I told her Grandpa was wrong, and adults say cruel things when they are selfish. Kara wrote notes quietly, then asked me to describe what happened. I told her my parents refused to take Sophie and called her names. Kara asked if this was new behavior, and I said no, it was a pattern. I said my parents always favored Rachel Grant, and they treat my child like an inconvenience. Kara nodded, not surprised, and she said we will focus on safety first. The minutes crawled, and I kept watching the door, praying Denise would arrive before my parents returned to cause more harm. Aunt Denise arrived with wind in her hair and worry in her eyes. She moved fast but steady, like someone who refuses to panic. She knelt beside Sophie Grant and said, "Hi, sweetheart, I am here now." Sophie stared at her for a second, then melted into her arms, crying quietly. Denise held her gently, then looked up at me, face tight with anger she was trying to control. She asked what happened, and I told her the short version, because my voice was fragile. Denise exhaled hard, then asked Kara Benson what she needed to sign. Kara handed her the forms, and Denise signed without complaint. She asked about my condition, and the nurse explained they were running tests, and I might be admitted. Denise nodded and said, "Sophie will stay with me, as long as needed." She turned back to me and said, "You focus on getting better. I will handle the rest." I felt tears burn again, because I was not used to being handled with care. Denise packed Sophie's little sweater into her bag, and she asked Sophie if she wanted to choose a snack from the vending machine. Sophie nodded, still sniffing, and Denise made it sound like a small adventure. Before leaving, Denise leaned close and whispered that Howard Grant and Deborah Grant will not get away with this. She said we will document everything, and we will protect Sophie. Kara nodded and said she would add Denise as an approved contact, and she would note the refusal in the report. Denise thanked her, then asked if she could see the discharge plan, so she could coordinate. The competence in her voice made me feel safer than any apology could. As they walked toward the exit, Sophie looked back at me, eyes wet. I waved and told her I love you, and I will see you soon. Denise promised she would bring Sophie back to visit, if doctors allowed it. When the curtain closed again, the room felt emptier, but my chest felt lighter. Someone finally chose my child, without bargaining, without sighs, without cruelty. That night, after the tests, the doctor told me I needed to stay for monitoring. My pain was real, but the deeper ache was emotional, like a bruise inside memory. I kept replaying Deborah Grant's face, the way she refused paperwork like it was trash. I kept hearing Howard Grant call Sophie a nightmare, and I felt rage hot in my throat. Kara Benson checked on me once more, and she said Denise texted that Sophie was asleep, safe and fed. I thanked Kara, and she told me I did the right thing by naming another contact. When the room quieted, I thought about how this started. Deborah and Howard always treated Rachel Grant as the golden child, the one who deserved help, attention, and praise. Rachel could be late, rude, and demanding, and my parents would call it stress. I could be sick, exhausted, and scared, and they would call it drama. When I became a mother, I hoped they would soften, but they did not. They treated Sophie like a burden, and treated Miles Carter like a prize. They would cancel on Sophie's birthday, then post photos with Miles at the beach. They would claim they were too tired to babysit, then spend a weekend on a fancy tour. I kept trying to earn their kindness, because part of me still wanted parents who showed up. I kept making excuses, telling myself they would change when it mattered. In the hospital it mattered, and they still walked out. The realization felt like a door shutting, final and loud. I stared at the ceiling and promised myself one thing. Sophie will never think she is too much. She will never think love is conditional, or that family means being humiliated. Denise proved that love can be simple, present, and fierce. And my parents proved something else, that I needed boundaries, not hope. The next morning, my phone lit up with messages from Deborah Grant. She did not ask how I felt, and she did not ask about my tests. She wrote that I embarrassed the family at the hospital, and that Sophie Grant needed discipline. She said Howard Grant only spoke the truth, and I should stop being sensitive. Then she added that Rachel Grant was stressed, and they had promised to help with Miles' Carter trip. I stared at the screen, and my hands shook with anger. Kara Benson returned to check my discharge plan, and I showed her the messages. Kara read them, then nodded slowly, and said, "This is useful documentation." She told me to save everything, because patterns matter. Denise texted again, saying Sophie slept through the night and woke up calm. Denise also said Sophie asked if she was bad, and Denise told her no. Hearing that made my throat tighten, because my child was already carrying shame she did not deserve. Later, the doctor told me I could go home, but only with rest and follow-up care. I asked if I could see Sophie today, and the nurse said yes, if I did not push myself. Denise brought Sophie in the afternoon, holding her hand gently. Sophie ran to me, then stopped short, afraid to hurt me. I opened my arms and pulled her close, careful and slow. Sophie whispered that Grandma said she was too loud. I kissed her hair and told her loud is not bad, and feelings are not bad. Denise watched, eyes wet, then told me my parents called her. Denise said Deborah demanded Sophie back, not because she missed her, but because she did not want social services involved. Denise told Deborah no, and said the hospital documented everything. Deborah then threatened to call the police, and Denise told her to do it, because truth does not fear paperwork. I felt a strange calm, because Denise was doing what I never dared. She was refusing to be bullied. When Sophie left again, she looked lighter, like someone finally believed her. I lay back in my bed that night, and I realized my parents were not worried about my health or Sophie's safety. They were worried about looking bad and losing control. 2 days later, Denise came to my apartment with groceries and a notebook. She said she wanted to understand the full situation because she did not trust Deborah Grant's version. Denise sat at my kitchen table and asked me to tell her everything, slowly, from the beginning. I told her about years of favoritism, about Rachel Grant getting help without limits. I told her how Howard Grant mocked my parenting, and how Deborah always defended him. Denise listened, then asked a question that made my stomach drop. She asked if I still send Deborah money each month. I froze, because I had never said it out loud to anyone. I nodded, and I admitted that for 7 years, I sent a fixed amount monthly. Deborah claimed it was for her back pain and for medical costs. On top of that, there were emergencies, car repairs, bills, and sudden needs. Denise wrote it down, then asked if I had receipts. I told her I had bank records because I automated most payments. Denise leaned back, eyes hard, and said Deborah has been telling people the opposite. Denise said she heard Deborah complain at family gatherings, saying Olivia never helps. Denise said Deborah used my money, then used my silence to paint me as selfish. Hearing that made me feel sick, because it matched everything else. Denise asked why I kept paying, and I told her the truth. I was trying to buy peace, and I was trying to protect Sophie from being punished. I thought if I helped, they would soften, or at least stop attacking me. Denise shook her head and said, "Payment never buys respect, it only buys access." Then Denise told me she saw Deborah new photos online, smiling on the coast with Rachel and Miles. Denise said Deborah looked relaxed, not like a woman in pain. I felt rage flare. And then I felt shame, because I knew Denise was right. I had been funding a fantasy, while my daughter was being insulted. Denise said we will not act from emotion, we will act from evidence. She said we will gather records, summarize them, and choose a moment when they cannot twist the story. I asked Denise what she meant, and she said you will see, but first you heal. She looked at me and said one more thing. Your parents refused to take Sophie, and that is neglect, not a misunderstanding. I nodded, because the word felt harsh, but accurate. A week later, Deborah Grant announced a family dinner, posting it like a celebration. She wrote about togetherness, and how family always shows up. Denise read the post, then looked at me and said, "This is the moment." She told me we would go, not to fight, but to place truth on the table. Denise printed bank summaries, highlighted transfers, and organized dates in order. She also asked Kara Benson for a copy of the hospital note, showing my parents' refusal to take Sophie Grant. Kara could not give private documents directly, but she confirmed what was recorded, and she advised us to keep our own notes. On the evening of the dinner, I arrived with Denise, holding Sophie's hand. My body still felt weak, but my mind felt clear. Deborah greeted us with a bright smile that did not reach her eyes. Howard Grant made a joke about me being dramatic, and Rachel Grant laughed too loudly. Miles Carter ran around the living room, while Sophie stayed close to my side, quiet and careful. Deborah asked why Denise was there, and Denise said, "I am family, and I am also here for safety." Dinner began with small talk, then Deborah made a speech about sacrifice. She said she always carried the family, and she implied that some people only take. Then she looked directly at me, waiting for me to shrink. Denise did not let it happen. Denise stood up, calm and steady, and asked one question. She asked Deborah why she refused to take Sophie from the hospital. The room went quiet, and Forks paused in midair. Deborah blinked fast, then said she had plans. Howard said Sophie is difficult. Rachel shrugged and said kids cry. It is not a big deal. Sophie's eyes widened, and she looked down at her plate. Denise then placed the printed summaries on the table. She said for 7 years, Olivia has been sending money monthly, plus emergencies. Denise said the total is not a guess. It is documented. Deborah's face strained, and Howard looked confused. Rachel leaned forward, scanning the pages, and her mouth tightened. Denise said you cannot call Olivia selfish while taking her money and abandoning her child. Deborah tried to laugh, then tried to cry, but her voice cracked. And for the first time in my life, I watched my parents run out of easy excuses in front of witnesses. Howard Grant pushed the papers away like they were insulting him. He said this is private business, and Denise had no right to bring it up. Denise stayed calm and said private business becomes public when you call someone selfish in public. Deborah Grant tried to grab the pages, hands trembling, and she said Denise is twisting things. Denise asked Deborah a simple question. Did Olivia send you money each month for 7 years? Deborah opened her mouth, then closed it, because everyone was watching. Rachel Grant leaned back, eyes narrowing, and said even if Olivia helped, she did it because she wanted to. She said Olivia always plays the victim, and she said Sophie Grant is too sensitive. Hearing my child dismissed again made my throat burn. I told Rachel to stop talking about my daughter like she is an inconvenience. Rachel shrugged and said kids toughen up. Denise turned toward Rachel and asked why Deborah and Howard chose Miles Carter trip over Sophie's safety. Rachel tried to laugh it off, saying the coast was already booked and Miles deserved it. Denise asked if Sophie did not deserve a safe guardian while her mother was being tested in a hospital bed. Howard muttered that Olivia should have handled her own child. Denise reminded him that hospitals require guardianship, and refusing can trigger social services. Deborah's face tightened, and she hissed that Kara Benson overreacted. Denise replied that Kara did her job because Sophie was left without an adult. Sophie sat very still, eyes on her hands, trying to disappear. I reached for her fingers under the table, and she squeezed back lightly. Deborah then tried the old tactic, turning toward relatives and saying Olivia never tells the full story. Denise asked if Deborah wanted the full story, because we can read the transfer amounts out loud. Howard slammed his palm on the table and said, "Stop." He said, "I am the father, and you will respect me." Denise looked at him and said, "Respect is earned, and you did not earn it when you called a child a nightmare." The room felt frozen. A cousin whispered that Howard should apologize, and Howard glared. Rachel stood up and accused Denise of trying to steal the family. She said Denise always hated us. Denise said, "I do not hate you. I hate what you did to a child." Deborah started crying, saying she was overwhelmed and she had back pain and she needed help. Denise asked why she posted photos laughing on the coast, if her pain was so severe. Deborah cried harder, and the performance felt thin. For the first time I saw the truth clearly. They were not embarrassed that they hurt Sophie. They were embarrassed that people could see it. After dinner, Denise drove me and Sophie home in silence. My hands shook on my lap. Not from fear, but from adrenaline leaving my body. Sophie asked a small question. Are Grandma and Grandpa mad at me? I turned toward her and said, "No, they are mad because they got caught being unfair." Denise told Sophie that none of this is her fault, and she repeated it until Sophie nodded. That night, Denise helped me open my banking app. We pulled up the recurring transfer to Deborah Grant, the one that had been running like a clock. Denise asked if I was ready, and I said yes, because I could not keep paying people who hurt my child. I canceled the transfer, then blocked the account link. My finger hovered for 1 second, and I felt grief, because part of me still wanted parents who behaved like parents. Then I pressed confirm, and the grief shifted into relief. Denise told me to take screenshots, because evidence matters. The next morning, Deborah started calling. She left voicemails asking what happened, then demanding answers. Howard sent a message blaming me for causing stress. Rachel wrote that I was ruining the family, and she called me selfish. I did not reply. Denise told me to let their words collect in a file, not in my heart. Kara Benson checked in by phone, asking if Sophie was safe and stable. I told her Denise was caring for Sophie, and Kara sounded relieved. Kara also told me that if my parents tried to interfere, I should document it and call if needed. That afternoon, Denise took Sophie to the park, and I rested. When Sophie came back, she looked lighter, like she was not holding her breath anymore. She showed me a drawing of our apartment, with 3 stick figures holding hands, me, her, and Denise. I cried quietly, because my child had already learned who shows up. Denise sat beside me and said, "The next step is boundaries, and boundaries require consistency." She said, "We will not negotiate with guilt. We will respond only through written terms." That night, I slept with my phone on silent for the first time in years, and my chest finally felt like it could expand without fear. 2 days later, Deborah Grant showed up at my door, banging hard enough to scare Sophie Grant. Howard Grant stood behind her, arms crossed, face red. Rachel Grant stayed in the car, watching. I did not open the door. Denise stood beside me, calm and steady, and spoke through the door. She told them to leave, and she said Sophie was safe. Deborah shouted that she's the grandmother, and she has rights. Denise replied that grandparents do not have rights to traumatize a child. Howard demanded that I come outside, and he said I owe them an explanation. Denise said Olivia does not owe you anything, and if you continue, we will call law enforcement. Deborah then switched to crying, saying she needs her money for medical care, and she cannot survive without it. Denise asked why Deborah never mentioned that need when she booked a coast trip. Howard shouted that Denise is poisoning me. Denise replied that the truth is not poison, it is medicine. Sophie hid behind my leg, and I felt anger rise like fire. I told Howard to stop calling my daughter names, and to stop coming to my home. Deborah screamed that Sophie is the reason everyone is stressed. I told her Sophie is a child, and adults are responsible for their own choices. Denise took out her phone and started recording, stating the date and time, out loud. Deborah stopped for a moment, realizing there was now a record. Howard muttered that this is ridiculous. Then he grabbed Deborah's arm and pulled her back. Before leaving, Deborah said, "I will tell everyone you abandoned us." Denise answered that you already told everyone Olivia never helps, and now the receipts exist. They left in a fury, tires scraping as they pulled away. Denise closed the curtain, then knelt to Sophie level, and told her she was safe. Sophie asked if Grandma will take her away. Denise said no, and she said adults cannot do whatever they want just because they are loud. I held Sophie close, and I felt something settle inside me. This was not just about money. This was about protecting my child from people who treat love like control. The next day, Kara Benson called to follow up. She said the hospital had filed a standard note about the guardianship refusal, and she wanted to confirm that Sophie Grant was safe. I told her Sophie was with me and Denise, and that my parents had shown up angry at my home. Kara asked if they threatened to take Sophie, and I said they tried to intimidate us. Kara told me to write down exactly what was said, and to keep any camera footage or recordings. She explained that patterns of verbal aggression matter, especially when a child is involved. Denise sat beside me while I wrote a timeline. The hospital refusal, the dinner confrontation, the canceled transfer, and the visit at my door. Kara said she could not give legal advice, but she could tell me the difference between a family conflict and a safety concern. She said calling a child a nightmare, refusing guardianship, and showing up to intimidate can become a safety concern if it continues. Hearing that made my stomach tighten, but it also gave me clarity. Denise asked Kara if there were resources for documentation and support. Kara recommended a local family services center, and she also said to keep communication in writing whenever possible. That afternoon, Denise helped me draft a short message to Deborah Grant and Howard Grant. It stated that they were not to contact Sophie directly, and that any communication must go through Denise while I recover. It also stated that showing up unannounced would be documented. Denise sent it, then saved screenshots. Within an hour, Rachel Grant posted online again, hinting that Denise kidnapped Sophie. Denise forwarded the post to Kara, and Kara said to keep it in the file. Denise also told me that false public statements can backfire when evidence exists. That night, I sat on the couch with Sophie, watching a quiet movie, and I felt something new. I felt protected by process, not by hope. And for the first time, I understood that being calm does not mean being weak. It means being prepared. 2 days later, Denise invited a few relatives to her house for coffee. She did not call it a meeting. She called it clarity. She said she wanted witnesses who could not be manipulated later. I agreed, because gossip thrives in shadows. When we arrived, Sophie Grant stayed in the living room with a cartoon, while adults sat at the dining table. Denise laid out the timeline again, and she showed the bank summaries with 7 years of monthly transfers to Deborah Grant. She also showed screenshots of Deborah posts claiming Olivia never helped. Then Denise read the message Howard Grant said at the hospital, calling Sophie a nightmare. The room went quiet, and one aunt covered her mouth. A cousin asked if this was real, and Denise said yes, and she offered to show additional records without revealing account numbers. Rachel Grant arrived late, face tight, eyes sharp. She tried to turn the mood by saying Olivia always exaggerates, and Sophie is difficult. Denise asked Rachel why she and Deborah chose a coast tour with Miles Carter while Olivia was being tested in the hospital. Rachel said it was already paid for. Denise asked if a prepaid trip matters more than a child needing a guardian. Rachel stumbled, then said Olivia should have better childcare planning. Denise replied that hospitals do not schedule emergencies around your comfort. Rachel then tried to accuse Denise of turning the family against her. Denise said no, your own choices did that. One relative asked Rachel if she knew Olivia was sending money, and Rachel said she did not. Denise showed a screenshot of a message from Deborah to Olivia, requesting an emergency payment for Rachel. Rachel's face drained, and she looked away. Denise told the room that the goal is not revenge, it is protection. She said, Olivia will not resume payments, and Sophie will not be exposed to insults. She said if the family wants contact, they can start by apologizing and correcting lies publicly. Rachel left early, furious. Later, Denise told me Rachel will keep trying to shift blame because accountability threatens her comfort. I believed her because I had seen it. A week later, Denise came to my apartment with a folder and a calm expression. She said she spoke with a family attorney and she wanted to explore options. The attorney explained that recovering money can be difficult, but patterns of deception and documented refusal can support claims. Denise said she did not want to drag me into court unless it was necessary, but she wanted leverage to stop harassment. She showed me a draft cease and desist letter addressed to Deborah Grant, Howard Grant, and Rachel Grant. It required them to stop contacting Sophie, stop showing up unannounced, and stop posting false statements. It also demanded they retract claims that Denise kidnapped Sophie. Denise asked if I was ready to send it. I said yes, because I was done being attacked for protecting my child. The letter went out, and within days, Deborah toned down her messages. Howard stopped showing up. Rachel deleted one post, but replaced it with a new vague one. The attorney advised us to keep collecting evidence because people who rely on drama rarely stop quickly. Around that time, Denise helped me review my bank history more deeply. We calculated the total amount I sent over 7 years, including emergencies. Seeing the number in one place made my chest tighten. I had been paying for their comfort, while my daughter was being called names. Denise said we could pursue partial recovery through small claims for specific transfers, or through a civil filing if evidence supported it. We decided to start with the letter, then escalate only if needed. That night, Sophie sat beside me with a stuffed animal and asked if Grandma still thinks she is bad. I took a breath and told her the truth in a gentle way. I said sometimes adults make hurtful choices, and it is never the child's fault. I told her she is kind and brave and loved. Sophie leaned her head on my shoulder and said she likes living with us and Denise. I kissed her forehead and promised that I will always choose her safety. The promise felt heavier than any court document, and it also felt more important. Because this story was never only about my parents. It was about ending a cycle before it reached my child. A month later, we took one step further, not out of revenge, but out of protection. The attorney helped us file a limited claim for a specific set of transfers. The ones Deborah Grant labeled as medical emergencies, but used for travel and extras. Denise came with me to court, and she brought a clean packet of records, screenshots, and timelines. I was nervous, but I stayed steady, because the documents spoke louder than emotion. Howard Grant arrived with Deborah, both dressed as if they were victims. Rachel Grant did not come, but she sent messages to relatives, saying I was suing my own parents. In the courtroom, Deborah tried to cry and describe herself as sick and abandoned. The judge asked for evidence, and Denise handed over the bank summaries, the message requests, and the posts where Deborah claimed Olivia never helps. When the judge asked why Deborah refused to take Sophie Grant from the hospital, Howard tried to interrupt, calling Sophie difficult. The judge corrected him sharply, saying a child is not a legal excuse for abandonment. Deborah's face tightened and her tears slowed, because the room did not reward performance. The judge reviewed the records, asked clear questions, and then issued a limited order requiring repayment of a portion tied to the documented false requests. It was not everything, but it was a public acknowledgement. Outside the courtroom, Deborah hissed that I ruined her, and Howard said I would regret this. Denise told them to speak through the attorney, then walked me to the car. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the release of years of swallowed anger. That night, I told Sophie in simple words that we went to a place where adults tell the truth. Sophie asked if Grandma will be mad, and I said, Grandma, feelings are not our responsibility. I told Sophie that when someone hurts you, you can ask for help, and you can set rules. Sophie nodded, then went back to coloring. Watching her calm felt like the real win. In the weeks after court, the noise finally softened. Deborah Grant stopped posting, because her lies had a paper trail now. Howard Grant stopped showing up, because threats stopped working. Rachel Grant went quiet, because her vague stories could not compete with documented facts. Denise helped me set up a simple financial plan, rebuilding savings and creating a small emergency fund, so I would never feel trapped again. She also helped me arrange a childcare backup list, neighbors, a trusted friend in her, so Sophie Grant would never be stranded. Kara Benson checked in once more, and she closed her file with a note that Sophie was safe and stable. That word, stable, felt like a blessing. I focused on my health, follow-ups, rest, and a routine that did not revolve around fear. Sophie started sleeping better, and her teachers said she seemed lighter. One afternoon, Sophie asked if we still have grandparents. I told her we have people who love us, and love is the only title that matters. Denise smiled and said we build our own family by choosing kindness. Months later, I saw Deborah at a grocery store. She looked away first. I did not chase her, and I did not flinch. I bought my items, held Sophie's hand, and walked out into sunlight. In the parking lot, Sophie looked up and asked if I was sad. I told her I was proud. Proud that we chose safety. Proud that we told the truth. Proud that we did not let cruelty become normal. When we got home, Sophie ran to her room, laughing, and I stood in the doorway listening to that sound. It was the sound of a child who does not feel like a nightmare. It was the sound of a cycle ending,